Hey, what's up, everyone? This is part of my strategy to just every time I have 5, 10, 15 minutes spare, just like jump onto a stream because it's just too hard to make a video and then find time to upload it. I work better slightly stream of conscious. So anyway, it is May 19th, which means it is the release anniversary of both episode 1 and episode 3. So you got to do something to commemorate that, right? And I sort of thought I had a couple of brief things to sort of mention, particularly about episode 1. Which is just sort of like the speculation and rumors about what it would all be about and the prequels in general, as well as the hype, the anticipation, and then sort of as the prequels progress, sort of like then like really sort of are starting to wonder, well, how are we going to now, having seen what we've seen in episode 1, how are we going to get to episode 2 and 3? I remember as early as 1994 hearing from, I remember at a local toy store, the owner saying, have you heard the rumors? It's happening. The prequels are actually happening. They're under production. Lucas is working on them now. And I couldn't believe it. And because that was something that I don't know that we really knew we ever would see. There have been talk for years about how it was a potential and maybe it was happening, maybe it wasn't going to happen, right? Lucas stays busy with all these other projects for years, right? And then it finally came. But from 94 to 99, it was a long, long time to wait. And it's almost hard to remember now what a lot of folks thought about what the prequels would ultimately be about, because so much time's passed. But, were they going to be about the ancient old republic? Were they going to be about the Clone Wars? One of the things that I still find so fascinating about A New Hope is that one line between Anakin or between Obi-Wan and Luke about how he fought in the Clone Wars. That was something that always stuck with me, right? Way before the prequels, way before most of sort of like the post 91 EU. Always wondered what on earth this Clone Wars was. How significant was it? Was it the impetus for the fall of the Republic and for the fall of Anakin, or was it like a lot of things just like a footnote in the much larger context of some, galactic sort of downfall, right? There's plausibly a version of Star Wars where we never hear about the Clone Wars again because it would have just been a battle or a series of battles, right? And not the entire war, right? Instead, it obviously becomes utterly crucial to the prequels and the downfall of the Republic and the downfall of the Jedi. But you could have only speculated that, obviously prequels. I remember a lot of the casting news started to, really start to spur a lot of the rumors and a lot of the wild speculation, with Liam Neeson being cast. I remember thinking, okay, well, maybe he's going to play some, maybe he's going to be like Luke's grandfather or something, right? I mean, the thing about the ages, trying to figure out the ages was tricky, right? And we definitely know that there was an earlier conception from Lucas of the prequels where a lot of people were older, and I still question some of the some of the narrative choices and some of the lore choices around just how old people were and just how close the prequels were ultimately to the original. But again, I mean, just to preface this, I mean, I enjoy the prequels. I value the prequels for their contributions to lore. I think it's unfair to critique them purely as films, right? We don't look at this just as through the mediums in which they're produced. You value Star Wars and the broader expanded universe for its contributions to the lore. You follow the movies, you read the books, not because you're a film critic or trying to deconstruct it in some literary sense, but because you want to know more about what happened, right? And so I think there's a time and place to do that, but I think that you primarily value it for the contributions to lore, right? Say what you will about the films, you value it for what it told you about the greater Star Wars sort of universe. But but there, as I say, there is a time and place to sort of offer some critiques and stuff. And I don't have a broad critique of the prequels, but I do have ideas for how I would have tweaked it had it been me making any decisions, which of course it was, and of course it wouldn't be. But I think the first thing I would probably do would be, in the case of episode 1, is I would probably set whatever you wanted to be your starting sort of film's adventures, probably a little later in Anakin's life, and only to mirror A New Hope, and at least in the sense of the ages of both Luke and Anakin. I think it would be neat to sort of really mirror the two sort of original trilogies, right? In that way, right? So you meet Luke as a teenager, and then you start off meeting Anakin as a teenager. And I mean, unfortunately, what you have to do in that conception is maybe forsake any sort of idea that, okay, Anakin is this sort of like latecomer to the new Jedi Order, right? You have to take some of that mystery away, and maybe that's undoable, right? Maybe you can't do that, right? Or maybe there's that mystery, but it's not as important as Lucas wants to make it in the context of the prequels, right? I mean, I think there's a version of the prequels where instead of Anakin being this sort of latecomer to the Jedi Order that people are concerned about, and you just make him an already established either Jedi or Padawan, and you don't necessarily make his downfall about this supernatural sort of Faustian bargain to keep Padme alive. Instead, you maybe make it about his increasing power in the Jedi Order and the Old Republic corrupting him in some way, right? I think there's a version, in other words, of Star Wars where the prequels aren't about the fall of a republic, but I think, in my view, much more intelligibly about almost a Lord of the Rings style sort of return of the rightful king, right? And that Sidious is either this corrupt emperor, right, or he's someone who has usurped power. Because it's always struck me as slightly dissonant that we talk about a republic alongside this knightly cast of Jedi, princes and stuff who sort of roam the galaxy for keeping order. It seems to me that like the old republic really should have been sort of like almost, again, the old sort of kingdom, right? Again, sort of like Tolkien-esque, right? And so that the original trilogy isn't so much about restoring the republic as it is about, again, restoring sort of just, peace and tranquility in the realm, right? And putting the rightful king back in power. And then again, that maybe would have been too much like Tolkien, and that may be one reason to sort of argue against that. One reason why Lucas wanted to go that way. And I also know that Lucas, the prequels, was heavily influenced by sort of the history of the decline of the Roman Republic and the rise of the empire. So obviously there's an analog, that he wants to tell there. And so I sort of get that, right? But again, I think that would be probably some of the basic tweaks I'd make. I think I'd slightly sort of age up Anakin, and I would start him slightly older in episode 1. Drop some of the mystery about sort of like who he is. I don't know that I would even, I don't want to open up a can of worms about the Chosen One prophecy, but you wouldn't necessarily even have to sort of delve into that. You could tell an intelligible, narratively satisfying story about his either corruption or confusion over who the rightful king should be, right? And that confusion would sort of track alongside just the galactic sort of confusion over the way that that the galaxy should sort of govern itself. And as that falls, Skywalker falls, and gives him. I mean, what's missing here is sort of how does the light and dark side play into this? Which is why, again, I think Lucas obviously picked the right choice, and obviously is much smarter about Star Wars than I am. But I going back though to the anticipation on episode 1. I mean, it's for anyone who wasn't around at the time, it's true. I mean, the hype you read about how anticipated it was is absolutely true. It's almost impossible to understate. Really, probably the most anticipated film of all time. I remember distinctly watching the trailer for the first time. They made a big deal about how it was going to air on TV for the first time, and they advertised the fact that there's going to be, they're advertising an advertisement, right? It was like, clear the decks, clear your calendar. It's going to air. I think it was on Fox in the middle of the week. I forget. It's just that I knew to be available for that. And it's left a real impression. I mean, I still think that the original Phantom Menace trailer, Say What You Will About the Film, is probably the best trailer ever made. It's utterly epic. It's got that Star Wars feel, the sights, the sounds. It couldn't have been more exciting. And yeah, anyway, I mean, episode 1's a film that, I said this before, of the prequels in particular, it's probably the one that I watched the most. Do I think it's the best? I don't know, but there's something about it that's very enjoyable. I mean, it feels like, and I heard someone say this one time, it's interesting, it almost feels like it's an expanded universe adventure, and you could take episode 1 out of sort of the prequel sort of context, and it could just be a standalone book or story or adventure, right? And there's something sort of fun about it. It's a straightforward adventure. The good guys win. There's a little bit of mystery. It leaves some sort of, doors open for some sort of follow-up and stuff, right? Obviously you're introduced to some sort of the, the return of the Sith and things like that. Um, but there's something sort of, something innocent about it. It really feels like an adventure set in a more peaceful time in an old republic, right? There's something about even the music and the opening scene when Anakin and and Qui-Gon are sort of like entering sort of the Federation sort of ship. There's something that the music that John Williams produces, it's very knightly. It sounds like something you'd hear almost like at a medieval fair or something. It just feels like an old-fashioned adventure set in almost like a medieval time. And which really reinforced in my mind the idea that the Jedi are this sort of like princely knights and things like that in sort of an older time and a more peaceful time where anyway, so it's there's just something fun about that. And I think that's contrasted with Revenge of the Sith, which I do like, but which I've probably seen the least out of any of the six. I just don't find myself rushing to rewatch that. Definitely there's scenes that I rewatch all the time. I mean, I can't count how many times I've gone on YouTube to rewatch, the Darth Plagueis sort of story, the opera. I mean, that's amazing. That's one of the best scenes of all time. But it's like for whatever reason, in the way that the episode one sort of paints sort of a fun, sort of adventurous sort of mood that you want to sort of be a part of, episode three, you kind of have to be in the mood for, right? Hey, what's up? Good, fantastic afternoon. Thanks for jumping on. Happy episode one and episode three release day. I remember. I remember leaving, speaking of episode three, I remember leaving episode two, opening night, and having seen the film and enjoyed it and was still sort of like trying to like take in all of the insane action, from the last, couple of minutes of the film and stuff like that. And then thinking, wait a minute, okay, so the Clone Wars have just started now. In the context of this prequel trilogy, we've got one film left. And I thought, oh my God, George has really painted himself into a corner. I mean, how on earth is he going to show the entire Clone Wars, right, in this next film? And obviously we end up getting a ton of supplemental material that bridges the gap so that episode three can be about just the fall specifically itself. But I remember being really sort of confused, which again is also reinforced why at the time and to this day, I always thought episode one, again, should have started at, I think, at a different point in the timeline to give more room to maybe tell more of the Clone Wars story. In the films. Then again, maybe the Clone Wars is supposed to exist in some supplemental fashion, right? So maybe it works out perfectly. But these are just some of the things that over the years I've sort of thought about how I potentially sort of tweak. Essential to read Jedi Apprentice novels for a better, more immersive episode experience, and it feels sort of like a finale. Yeah, well, I totally agree with that. And I think that one of the things that I can't help but now bring to bear on my reviewings of episode one is, everything that we know about from the EU, right? That amazing line of apprentice novels and stuff like that, and not to mention some of like the main adult novels and things like that, and Plagueis, and even the novelization itself, and Cloak of Deception and stuff. So the EU utterly enhances the experience of the prequels, and Jedi Apprentice is one of the best things to go for. Yeah, so episode one felt like a fairy tale, bright and colorful, absolutely. Episodes 2 and 3 got much darker, moody, and serious. Yeah, and not like it's a bad thing, right? Obviously, that's a stylistic choice they're sort of going for, but it just makes it sort of easier and harder to get into sort of different films. Yeah, no, it's one reason too why I think I sort of really I've gone back and forth about this over the years about what are my favorite Star Wars soundtracks, and I think one of the reasons why I always find myself coming back to episode one soundtrack being the one, whether I think it's the best or not, whether I certainly think I listen to it the most. It's got that. There's definitely some dark, some darker, moodier sort of tunes there, right? That you hear sort of repeated throughout the rest of the prequels. But it's like, yeah, there's just it just feels lighter, and that's sometimes fun. And that's sometimes what you're sort of looking for. But episode one, I mean, it just feels like it's just and I actually saw Pablo Hidalgo say something about this recently on Twitter. I think he was recently doing a ranking of all the Star Wars films, and what he said about episode one was interesting. I don't remember it verbatim, but he basically said, look, in Pablo's views, like episode one makes a lot of sort of brave decisions and weird choices and things, but they're things you respect and the things you want to kind of keep exploring, and it's yeah, Lucas always talks about the tone poems, right? And that was a big part of the episode 1 advertising campaign, right? There were all of these little short little vignettes, they were just little tone poems, right? And that's what that whole movie's about. It's just about sort of setting that tone. So, but this gets into another potential sort of, if we want to deconstruct the prequels, first of all, how dare we do this, right? I mean, they're perfect. They're perfect as they are. We've never questioned Lucas, but there is something about the prequels that is that's tricky. The prequels go from here's the thing. What I think they're trying to do is say, look, some obviously sort of superficial sorts of bumper sticker sort of slogans around like power corrupts and be careful of attachments because then but for as much as episode 1 tries to sort of just make this bright, colorful, innocent adventure, right, with this young boy who later becomes this sort of evil, Sith Lord, whatever, there's still, to my mind, just too many little nuggets of darkness in episode 1 in Anakin. And I feel like it, in a way, makes his ultimate fall both too predictable and just not as satisfying in a way. Because if you this is now just taking the films, right? This is not trying to bring in anything from the EU, anything more we know about the lore. I think that, and even Williams from time to time, in Anakin's score, he'll throw in a little bit of sort of darker sort of notes and things like that in the score. And it's like throughout, there's all these little breadcrumbs, right, that lead you to him turning to the dark side. And I think that's unfortunate because I think that there's a version of the prequels where Anakin just turns because he just loves Padme that much, right? And he is willing to make a deal with the devil in order to do anything to just potentially save her, right? And then what I think is cool about that is, so again, there's a version where you take out all those dark notes, even from the prequels, right? Where Anakin's sort of sassy and he's he's throwing shade at the Jedi Council when he first meets them, right? And all these sorts of things. You get to make this truly innocent, lovable little boy who's just never going to hurt a fly or whatever. And it's that utter love, right? It's that complete pureness that makes him want to make the Faustian bargain, because he just is so selfless that he just wants to give himself in order to save Padme. That's what would then make this sort of because remember what happens in Revenge of the Sith, right? He finally does that. Okay, in this weird moment, he kills Mace and then gives himself to the dark side, becomes Sidious's apprentice, becomes Darth Vader. And then Sidious goes, womp womp, by the way, I don't really know how to save people from dying, but I'm sure if we work together, we can figure it out. That's probably the moment that I guess Anakin probably should have stood up and said, I actually changed my mind. I'm a Jedi again, and now I'm going to kill you. But there's something so tragic about that, right? In sort of the classical sense of the word, where it's there's just he gave everything, but he didn't actually get what he wanted, right? And I sort of feel so I feel that would have been interesting. It would have been it would have been a bigger contrast, and I think in some ways slightly more satisfying, right? I mean, again, you're just you'd be so sad. You're no, don't do this. You're so good. Don't give it away. But then you're but I get why you're going to give it away, because you're going to be able to save someone, right? And then, but it turns out you got tricked the whole time because you can't actually save her. That's what I think would have, then you would have really seen how evil Palpatine was, right? Instead, the version we got, again, as early as episode 1, you hear dark side themes every once in a while in episode 1 when you're seeing Anakin. Again, you see him sort of being, kind of throwing shade at the Jedi Council. You see him sort of being mean. He's sort of hard to control. There's concerns about whether he's too old, right? I mean, the Jedi are just telling you that this is going to be a problem, and it's it makes it more a story of, oh, okay, yeah, he's a troubled kid who had all these horrible things happen to him. Again, just thinking in the context of the films, he's plucked away from his mom, who we can't see, who like is still a slave because for some reason like they can't free her, right? So yeah, he's got to leave his mom. He can never see her again. She's a slave. He goes to Coruscant, and the Jedi Council is like kind of like giving him grief. He loses his mom, to the Tusken Raid. I mean, so all these horrible things are happening to him, but he's always had this kind of edge in him. So you sort of think, yeah, by episode 3, he was always heading that way, right? And so what I think the prequels do is they tell a very logical, intelligible story about how a flawed person, because we're all flawed, makes a flawed decision that not only affects him but affects the Jedi Order and the Republic, right? And it's his son who has to make the right decisions to redeem him and redeem the Republic. That to me is like, it's a very linear, very logical story, very intelligible story. But I think that it kind of misses some bigger sort of narrative payoffs and dramatic and sort of tragic payoffs, right? And I think that this is what I actually think is interesting about the Tartakovsky Clone Wars, and how I think it does something slightly better than just the prequels when it comes to explaining what it is that Anakin, like why does it Anakin is like willing to sort of give himself to the dark side, right? Because again, on just the superficial prequel account, he's someone who always had this edge in him. He was probably always sort of destined that way, right? And maybe it's a commentary about destiny in the context of Star Wars. I get that, right? But the thing about the Tartakovsky Clone Wars is, if you remember when he, let me see if I've got it here. So this is the production art from my favorite scene of the micro series. When he, in this scene, when he sticks his hand, right, to ultimately save those people who've been tortured and everything by the Techno Clan, whatever it was. What is he doing? He's giving a little bit into the dark side in order to save the day. And everyone hails him as a hero, right? And I think he starts to learn the wrong lessons. And I think that in general, the Clone Wars could really be slightly retold and recast as a story about like, look, like war is bad, war is evil, and it makes people do bad things. And in the name of heroism, you've actually like transubstantiated into this like awful being, right? It's like war like makes us worse, right? And Anakin doing these like aggressive things, giving into the dark side, right, for like heroic purposes, right? Like he's learning the wrong lesson. And I feel like, so in the way that the Republic learns the wrong lesson by engaging in war in the first place, right, to try and keep these separatists in the Republic, Anakin gives into the dark side, as you see in the Tartakovsky Clone Wars, right, but is praised for doing so and starts learning the wrong lessons as well. And so I think that if that was a bigger sort of motif in the prequel films, it would have made his Faustian bargain, I think, a lot more interesting, because I think you would have said, yeah, like you don't want him to do it, and you know it's not going to go well, but you would have understood his rationale a little bit, right? Because he would have said, look, like I've been doing more and more dark side things in the name of good all the while. So why not just completely give into the dark side, and I'll do the ultimate good thing, which is to sort of save Padme. And then again, you find out that like, womp womp, like, Sidious doesn't exactly know how to save people yet and stuff like that. So then there's something really tragic there. And so now now all of a sudden, only at the end, only having given himself over, only, having destroyed the Jedi Order, the Republic having fallen, does he finally realize that it was actually he and the Jedi and the Republic should never have been giving it to that, right, in the name of good, right? And so I feel like I think that idea is sort of shot throughout the EU. Tartakovsky gets it right, but I feel like it's slightly it's not missing from the prequels, but I think it's undercut by, again, as early as episode 1, sort of hearing sort of like the dark notes in the score and the edge and young Anakin and stuff. And then again, right into Attack of the Clones, where, Anakin's just a douchebag. You know what I mean? Like he's just an uncontrollable teenager. And I think that it would have been nice to see him be a bit more at least in the context of the films, a little bit more innocent all the way through. It's just learning the wrong lessons about the value of giving into the dark side. So anyway, that's sort of my broader sort of, not critique, but deconstruction, and how I sort of think, again, maybe to just to sort of underscore just how important the EU is, I think the EU helps you sort of see those things to sort of make his fall and the Republic's fall all the more narratively satisfying and all the more tragic. Again, the classical construction of the term. But the films themselves, I think, tell a slightly more simplistic linear story that, again, makes sense and is logical, but is sort of predictable. And it's honestly one reason why episode 3 probably is my least rewatched, because again, it's like it does feel so predictable to me. Just taking the films. Again, the EU obviously add a lot more to the story though. So am I able to explain Sidious's original plan? Kill the Jedi, blockade, sign treaty, and then that is the $1 million question. And I feel like Sidious's original plan is a bit like trying to understand like how World War I started, right? It's like I could do it, but it still isn't going to make a whole lot of sense, and it's really sort of convoluted. But it's a really good question. It's a good question. Am I able to do it? Yes, but probably not now. Maybe on my next stream. Maybe let's take some time and let's talk about the whole thing. But again, as I say, yes, I could, but it's still going to be a hell of a mess. Very convoluted to say the very least. Hello, happy episode 1 and episode 3 release day. I am just sharing some thoughts on the prequels and the anticipation of episode 1 and episode 3. And I remember I saw all the prequels on opening day. And that's a tradition that only really got started because almost by accident, I remember thinking, given how anticipated episode 1 was, I remember thinking that there'd be no way that I would be able to see it on opening day or opening night. There'd be no way I'd be able to get a ticket. And I didn't bother. And I don't remember, I mean, this is 1999. The internet's come a long way. I don't know if there were services that you could like go online and like pre-order tickets and things like that. So you pretty much had to show up and have a ticket, right? So just like on a lark, my friend and I at lunch just went over to the mall, to the movie theater to sort of see, we wanted to see the big lines, right? We just wanted to be a part of the hype. And to our shock, no one was in line. A show was starting right then. We were the only people in the theater. So I was slightly worried that this was a bad sign for the box office. Turns out it was just, there was a lot of theaters in town, I guess. And we were all distributed amongst the different anyway, I couldn't believe it. So at that point I said, okay, I need to see the other two on opening night as well. Palpatine must have looked in the future, predict certain events with the prequels. That's a totally plausible sort of way of making sense of a lot of sort of some of his decisions too. And it's been speculated, and I think somewhat convincingly, it's certainly sort of fun to think about that in the context of the EU, Palpatine must have foreseen the invasion of the Vong, which may be one reason why he actually built up the Empire in the first place, to build up requisite military forces in order to combat that threat. Although that would be, I think, slightly too altruistic in the final analysis. But I think that it'd be interesting to sort of speculate further about which sort of events in particular in the future he must have been able to foresee in some ways that could help him with his plan. I mean, he talks to us, right? And just thinking of the context of the films, I mean, he talks to us in the original trilogy, right, about how things are unfolding as he is foreseen. So either he is making that up, or he actually did get a chance to sort of peek into the future. So it's fun to sort of think about. Okay, now Quality has been very daring and has summarized the plan: blockade, sign treaty, step 3, and then profit. Indeed, love it. Great use of the meme. Great use. The opening tracking shot 3 blew my mind. The only one in the saga, I think. And it's funny you say that, because a couple days ago I watched that again, just that scene, and I always remember the way I felt when I first saw it, which is it was just stunning, and it really still holds up. But it was utterly, utterly stunning to see it for the first time on the big screen. Really, really, really cool. Yeah, I mean, everyone talks about the A New Hope opening be sort of mind blowing, and I think in the context of 1977, it was pretty damn mind blowing. But that episode 3 opening tracking shot, yeah. if it doesn't best it, at least sort of gives it a run for its money for sure. Yeah, man, it's interesting. It's almost hard to remember, though. It really is. It's been so long. It's almost hard to remember what a lot of people thought the prequels would be. I think I said before, but I mean, again, there was wild speculation. Was it going to be about the ancient Old Republic, or about the Clone Wars entirely, or what? But again, the casting itself led to lots of rumors too. I remember being slightly mixed about Samuel Jackson getting cast, because I remember thinking, well, gosh, on the one hand, you got to remember in the mid '90s, like no one was more popular in Hollywood, Samuel Jackson, coming off of like Pulp Fiction and things like that. I mean, nothing was giving. I mean, it was on the one hand so cool to see, but then again, it felt so sort of like, oh, okay, so now we're just gonna like pull in like all the cool people, right? You know, and it was, but it obviously worked out pretty well, I think, in the end, seeing him as Mace Windu. The prequels released about 20 years ago are more large scale than the sequels. Yeah, that's my sense. I don't really know any. I can't really comment on the sequel trilogies, unfortunately. Haven't seen them, but that's what I hear. And I remember a couple years ago hearing God, what's his name? Why can't I think of his name? Cameron, the director of like Avatar, like James Cameron. I remember him being interviewed right after Force Awakens, and someone said, "What do you think of him?" And he said, "Well, look, because George is a friend of mine, and he says, I want to see the new ones a few more times, let them sort of sink in." But he sort of concluded that whatever you think of the prequels or any of George's films, it just seemed like there were more new ideas in each, and more experimentation and bigger scale stuff. And I think that's really true. I think that feels right. I mean, it just intuitively right about. I mean, this is why we like George. He is he's a world builder. Episode 1 had the biggest marketing campaign as well. Yeah, that's true. That's true. There's a lot of different indications of that. There were so many movie tie-in products before the movie even came out: cups, bed sheets, shoelaces, toothbrushes, so on. It's crazy. It's totally true. There's a lot of different indications of this. I mean, in fact, I still have some of those. I mean, every single fast food restaurant did it. I mean, there's like Taco Bell cups and posters, and Burger King, this, that, the other. Every cereal box had, Ewan McGregor on it. I mean, it was really, really amazing. There was this, I remember there was this candy at the time, and it was an episode 1 tie-in where it was just Jar Jar's tongue, and you would press a button on the bottom, and his little tongue would spin, and you could lick the tongue, and it was like a lollipop or something in the shape of Jar Jar's tongue. Pretty perverted, actually, when you think about it, but they're still floating around. You can still find them at conventions and on eBay and stuff like that. But the number of tie-ins were insane. An interesting indication of how the tie-ins and the marketing started to decline over the prequels is if you go to Wikipedia. It's just a really quick snapshot. At the bottom of every article related to the prequel films, there's a little HNT, sorry, that's technical. There's a little info box at the very bottom of every article that basically provides some navigation to all of the related articles about that particular prequel in question. And when it comes to episode 1, that little box is like a mile long, right? Because it's got every book tie-in, soundtrack tie-in, video game tie-in, RPG tie-in. I mean, the list goes on. And all of a sudden, Attack of the Clones, all of a sudden there weren't as many children's book tie-ins. All of a sudden there weren't as many coloring books. And all of a sudden, for instance, we never got an episode 2 or episode 3, unabridged soundtrack, things like that, right? And it's a sort of sad sort of indication. Speaking of marketing too, I remember, Attack of the Clones took a pretty big dip in the box office, and it really came out at an unfortunate time when this was sort of like the rise of movies getting released online and stuff, and it got leaked. And I don't know that this significantly contributed to it, but I remember Lucasfilm thinking that the box office decline had a lot to do with the leak. And I'm not sure if that's entirely true, but that was an interesting element of the marketing campaign for sure. There was a lot more being said about Attack of the Clones before it came out because lots of people had seen it. I remember there was this site, Ain't It Cool News. I don't know if it still exists, but it was one of like the early sort of like, pop culture sort of like hype platforms back in the day. And I remember they'd seen an early cut of it, and they said it's the best Star Wars movie ever made. That was their view of Attack of the Clones before it came out. And I know that's a movie that just like, it's just, the consensus is that that's just not the best of this original six, and I don't know how I feel about that. There's things about it I don't like, but there's lots of things about it I really do. There's some things that haven't held up as well, for sure. But I gotta say, man, it's just like, I'll be totally honest, as slightly sort of fan fictiony as Yoda having a lightsaber battle was, it was still pretty damn awesome. And nothing was as cool as the scene in the Geonosian sort of Coliseum, when you think that's it, the Jedi are surrounded, and all of a sudden here come the clone troopers. That scene, just everyone in the audience was just like, it was pretty breathtaking, And again, does that really hold up now? I don't know, but at the time, it's pretty awesome. But oh, interesting. Wow, that is interesting. Huh. Yeah, well, the figures dropped off hugely too, and everything did. It was fascinating. I mean, the crates of just episode one stuff that are probably still like haven't even been. I mean, it's just amazing. That's interesting about Canada. Yeah, the Jar Jar tongue-kissed lollipop. I still see him all the time. I still see him at conventions, and yeah, it's pretty weird to think about what people do with those things. It's a weird thing, and it's weird too. It's like it's amazing what licensees think. It's like, I mean, someone just really took a chance on Jar Jar's tongue being like apparently a major element of the movie that people would really sort of resonate with. But go figure. Speaking of Jar Jar, here, I'll give a quick sort of rundown on, not like anyone's asking. Here's a quick rundown on my thoughts on episode one, sort of as I left the theater. Because it became apparent pretty quickly that like people didn't like Jar Jar. That was the consensus, right? This the sophisticated moviegoers, like the consensus was you're not supposed to like Jar Jar. I didn't mind Jar Jar. I think my greater problem with Jar Jar, again, this was my reaction to the extent I remember it, leaving the theater, having seen it for the first time, and I saw it multiple times when it was in theaters. But leaving the theater for the first time, I just remember thinking, I don't know what Jar Jar said. I had a really difficult time understanding anything he said. And the same was true with Boss Nass, really any of the Gungans. And I didn't know if it was because like I was sitting too close to the speakers or what. It was like the audio mix off. And I think come to find out, it was just that like, I think that's just the way the actors played, the characters. I just think that I just had a hard time understanding the dialogue, to be honest, and so I wasn't really in a position to sort of critique the character, because I wanted to know more about what the hell he was actually trying to say. And again, the same is true with Boss Nass. And it's ironic because I've seen the actor who voiced Boss Nass sort of, apparently he talked with Ahmed Best about like, or no, with Lucas about sort of saying, look, like maybe you should like have Best sort of tone down some of all of like the jumble in his mouth when he gets the other dialogue out right. And ironically, I think the actor portraying Boss Nass could have probably used that same advice. That's just my take. It's taken a number of viewings to really understand every particular word they're trying to sort of utter. Anyway, my main reaction to episode one as I left the theater was, yeah, you send big doo-doo toast. Yeah, there you go. I picked that lineup, I think. How old was I? I was in my 20s. And it's interesting that you were 6. I mean, it's funny. I think there's this view, by the way, that if you're sort of from an older generation, that like you're obviously just going to have this fidelity for the originals, and you're gonna like value the prequels, but you're just never gonna have the same relationship with them. One thing I've been noticing a lot of people my age is that we've done the original so many times, right? That like the prequels still feel sort of new and fun, and we were waiting so long. We were waiting decades to get the new ones that like there's a certain nostalgia I have for, like, say, episode one, even though I wasn't a kid, that I probably should have for, like, say, Ewoks and stuff like that, but that I have almost more for episode one, because I got to experience literally decades of anticipation, right? So in some ways, the prequels have really sort of risen in my estimation, at least nostalgically. And so anyway, yeah, I was I was all grown up, right? Supposedly well beyond the age that Star Wars films are sort of pitched at, right? They're supposed to be for kids, but no, I mean that's they worked for me. So um anyway, so my main feeling walking out of the theater episode one was like, huh, like, okay, like kind of did what it's supposed to do, right? Like it's the first of three prequels, right? That's supposed to connect with these other three films that we know really well. I certainly want to come back for more, like, and to that extent, like, it's done its job. All an episode one is supposed to do when there's an episode two is to, like, induce you to come back for episode two. And I did that. And I remember thinking, like, but like I kind of want more. I didn't just like it. I didn't. I liked it, but it was slow at times for sure. But that's not a problem. It was, you can obviously sort of critique. Occasionally there were some, like, acting beats that didn't work, and as I said, I could never understand what the Gungans were saying, but it obviously told a story, like, from A to B, and again left some clues about where we were going to go. Um, I um, but I was just kind of like, but I want more. And I feel like in some ways this is the danger of ever doing prequels or sequels or anything like that, right? Maybe leave the originals well enough alone. I mean, I wanted more, but I wasn't going to get it, right? If I wanted more, I should have waited for all three to come out and then be able to watch them all in one order, right? And so I just think, like, I've talked with other people who felt sort of the same way. It's like it did everything it needed to do. It's just that you wanted more, and unfortunately, you're going to have to wait to 2002 and 2005 to get it, right? So too bad. But it was a great time. It was a fun time to be a Star Wars fan, obviously, because decades of anticipation, a new film, all the new tie-ins, um, exploring a part of Star Wars that the EU really hadn't been allowed to explore, could only briefly sort of speculate about. Um, and it's the hype, the anticipation. It's just yeah, we'll never really see anything like that. In a way, the closest I've ever seen anything come to that is actually a couple of years ago when the last Avengers movie came out. And it just seemed to me like there was an excitement because there was an anticipation. I still don't think it matched the level of hype and anticipation for episode one, but it was certainly a moment when a lot of people, part of a pop cultural sort of phenomenon, were waiting to see something together and to sort of experience this together. And that was sort of fun. I just don't think we'll get that feeling again as sort of, as Star Wars EU fans. I don't think I ever have. No, you know what? Believe it or not, I've never done that. I should definitely make time for that. I've heard good things about it. Yeah, I remember being really sad about the reaction, though, to episode one, and in sort of not just like the pop cultural world and the movie critic world, but even partly in the fandom, you know what I mean? But I think the thing that whatever you think about it, you obviously take a risk, right? You've got this original trilogy, you've got all these supplemental stories up to that point that were keeping Star Wars fans interested. The funny thing is, despite the fact that we'd heard for years that there would be prequels, we weren't certain that there ever would be, which is why it was so exciting when around 94 we started to hear rumors that they were getting started. But the funny thing about this is just my experience, I guess. The funny thing about films in the context of Star Wars is that you don't need them to tell you more about Star Wars. That's what the EU does, right? And again, for the the major exception of about 6 hours of films, the vast majority of tens of thousands of lore, years of lore of Star Wars take place outside of the films. And so I to the extent that anyone ever had critiques of the prequels, I thought that I sort of thought the lesson really was maybe leave well enough alone, right? And again, I don't really follow the new stuff, but to the extent that lots of people have been very critical of those, I think that was probably the lesson that you should have learned from the prequels, right? To the extent that everyone sort of dumped on the old stuff and dumped on George, and now we've got new owners and new ownership, and out with the EU and those old dinosaurs and all. Like, we're going to tell this new exciting story, and it didn't go the way that I think they wanted, right? And because they thought they could like retell it. They thought, we're going to tell some really cool stories, update it. It's not going to be that old prequel crap or whatever. And it's like, maybe the problem wasn't with the substance of the prequels. Maybe the problem is leave well enough alone. Maybe we've got enough movies, and keep that something special, right? Maybe tell Star Wars in the context of books and comics and other things. So yeah. Hey, what's up, Dylan? Yeah, NJO started that year. That again, another good reason, another good year to be a Star Wars fan. That whole period of time, the whole prequel era was a fun time. And I've gone back and forth about this, but I've tried to think about like, what is my favorite year of the Star Wars fandom, or my favorite year of Star Wars? And it's some period of time within the prequel era. It could easily be 99. I've sometimes said 2005, but partly because it's like, it's sort of the end of that hype, right? Not that it's ending, it's just that like it's been building up for all those years, so that you get Revenge of the Sith, you get the end of Tartakovsky Clone Wars, you get there's some great video games coming around that time. It was a really exciting time. That prequel era is just such a fun thing to try and bottle up. I wish everyone could experience it who wasn't around for it. Yep. Anyway, though, so happy episode 1, episode 3 release day anniversaries. I hope you get a chance to rewatch them soon if you haven't already or don't have plans to do today. And yeah, I think I'm going to go rewatch them today and see if I can finally understand what Jar Jar and Boss Nass are saying. So adios, guys.